Welcome back to the vlog, everyone. Today we are at the Texas Card House once again. The wait at the lodge is just way too much for us to handle, so we're gonna go ahead and hop in today. Hopefully have a good time and make some money. The worst case scenario, we don't, but I'll let you guys know how it goes. Hopefully the game is good, and if not, we're gonna try to make it good. Gonna be a little splashy today. I don't know, just feel like being a little splashy. We've been running good on this trip. It's time to give back to the Texas economy. Anyways, let's hop into the session. I'll let you guys know how it goes. I've never strayed you folks away from the truth, and I promise you today, this very first hand is the most incredible hand we've played in the entire Texas trip. I know the comments are going to go crazy from how ridiculous this hand is and just how ridiculous this setup was. Early position decides to raise to $15. Under the gun +2 decides to make the call. Folds over to me in the small blind. We look down at pocket sevens. Gonna go ahead and be defending here pretty much every pair, it feels like. The big blind decides to make the call as well, and we're off to a flop, hoping we can ink a beautiful, beautiful set. And the flop comes just what the community ordered. Jack 8-7 with 2 diamonds, flopping bottom set on an unbelievably coordinated board texture. I decide to check to continue playing in flow. The initial raiser decides to c-bet for $45. Folds back over to me. I'm going to go ahead and put the raise in here, considering there's a ton of massive semi-bluffs that my opponent can have. Some kind of drawing hands, and I need to get as much money in the middle as I can early with the best hand. I decide to raise here to $150. The big blind decides to smooth call off about $1,100 stack. When it gets back over to the initial raiser, unfortunately, he doesn't like the price of $150, so he decides to make the 3-bet, the coveted post-flop 3-bet, $500 to go. Man, alarm bells are going off, but I feel like it'd be a little too nitty to just make the fold at this point. Sure, my opponent can have a hand that's made like 10-9 suited, and he can have us crush here with a hand like jacks or 8s, but there is an off chance that he can be a little aggressive with the flush draw, or a little aggressive with the combo draw, or maybe he has top 2 pair. I decide to just make the call. When it gets back over to the big blind, again, another unfathomable occurrence as a big blind decides to jam $1,100. Everything in this hand has not happened according to plan. Besides the fact that I flopped a set, everything else has just backfired on me. After the big blind decides to jam, the initial raiser, again, this hand can't get any more ridiculous, decides to jam for the unbelievable 5th bet on the flop for $3,500. The alarm bells are off. I don't need to be a GTO superstar to make a massive fold here. I end up folding bottom set, showing it to the table as they're pretty impressed. My opponent in the big blind decides to show ace-9 of diamonds, and my opponent in the initial raising position shows 10-9 offsuit. Definitely a spewy open from early position. I'm not gonna lie to you. Sorry if you're watching the video. You know, that has to mean a lot coming from the spewiest, puntiest guy you guys know, myself. But man, that is a little interesting to see that hand specifically. Anyways, they run out 2 boards. I would have won one of the boards as it did come out with a diamond, but it did follow with the board pairing card. Ridiculous spot, and happy we got away unscathed, I guess. I think that's the first time in my entire life that I've ever folded a set on the flop. I mean, there was a couple of lucky situations that let me get away from it, but let me know in the comment section down below. Did you guys think I was going to make that fold? Be honest. Like, really? Did you guys think I was going to make that fold? Anyways, catching up with this big hand here, Marcelo decides to open to $25 for middle position. We look down at Queen-9 offsuit here directly to his left. I'm going to go ahead and 3-bet here if I'm going to play this hand because it's far too weak to just make the call. I make it $85. Marcelo decides to 4-bet to $160. Unfortunately, just because of the price, I'm going to have to make the call here with this horrible hand. Obviously looking to get a really nice flop or something to go with this hand. Otherwise, I'm pretty much out of it every single time of the day. The flop comes a 4-3 deuce with 2 clubs. Marcelo decides to check here. And when it's on me, I just don't think I'm ever going to get a hand like ace high to fold here for any price. So I'm going to go ahead and check it back. The turn card comes an interesting one as it's the 8 of clubs. Marcelo at this point decides to lead out here for $200, leaving him exactly $400 behind. I think, do I have enough fold equity to make a big bluff here? I do have the 9 of clubs as a blocker, but otherwise, I mean, I just don't have any relevant blocking cards in my holdings. Besides the queen, I could be playing queens like this sometimes, but in reality, it's just a little unlikely. I think I would have taken over the betting lead on the flop with queens, so I'm going to go ahead and reluctantly decide to fold here. And good hand to Marcelo. Again, great friend of the vlog and has his own vlog himself, Marsh Poker. This episode hasn't come with its obstacles. And at this point, we look down at King 3 in late position and decide to raise to $25. The cutoff and the small blind decide to make the call. And we're going 3 ways to a flop that comes 9-6-5 with 2 diamonds and a club. We do have one backdoor draw that's relevant. Otherwise, not an awesome board texture for our raising range. We will have some 9s in our range and some straight draws in our range, but for the most part, not a great spot for us. We decide to c-bet for $35. Both players decide to make the call, and the turn is a great one as it comes the queen of clubs. At this point, I want to ramp up the size of the aggression. Gotta bet a little bit on the larger side, considering if we do make our hand, we want to be able to go massive, and if we don't make our hand, at least we're going to go massive anyways. When it's checked over to me, I'm going to go ahead and bet $150 with our newfound equity, looking to push both these players out of the hand. Only the small blind decides to make the call, and we're off to a river card that comes the 7 of spades. When the opponent checks it over to me, I think if I was going to be bluffing on the flop, this river is definitely going to help my bluffing range, as now a lot of my bluff straights do end up getting there. After a little bit of thinking, I decide that the only size of poker is to go all in, so I jam for $750 against my opponent's effective stack. And my opponent thinks about it for a brief moment before inevitably deciding to make the call. We show our king high, which is never going to be good, and our opponent shows 9-6, so they flop top 2 pair and got max value from me. Again, you know, it'll just help me off at later times and dates when I decide to go really massive and polar. You got to be able to throw these bluffs around, and like I promised earlier in the intro, I felt like I wanted to get a little dangerous today. So to this point, I haven't won a single hand. The only hand that I didn't win was a pretty big PLO bomb pot just before we got into that first hand of No Limit Holdem. The only thing I will add, of course, is that unfortunately, because the PLO bomb pots are just so ridiculous to like gather all the information, it's kind of ridiculous for me to recount the story, but nonetheless, it is what it is. It did happen. And in this next hand, like I promised, I'm trying to get mixy and tricksy. I don't even know what that means, but I'm trying to be a little trickster today. I'm in this straddle for $10. The button and the big blind decide to limp in. I decide to isolate with 6 deuce of clubs to $60. Both players decide to make the call, so we have position on one of the players in the hand, and we're off to the flop. The flop is 8-7-7 with 2 diamonds and a heart, a pretty awful flop for my hand, but that's never stopped me before. I'm going to go ahead and c-bet here for $75. Only the stickier button player decides to make the call, which is the player we played in the last hand, and we're off to a turn. The turn comes the 3. This now helps us in no way at all, no way, shape, or form, but I'm going to go ahead and keep the aggression up. I think I'd be double barreling with all my aces, kings, and queens in this spot, so I'm not going to stop here. I'm going to bet $150, and my opponent yet again decides to make the call. The river comes the ace of spades, so you know, even if we were bluffing, this river is just going to really help us out quite a bit. If I had a hand specifically like ace x of diamonds, and that would be like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, I would always be betting this river when I get there. So I decide to bet something a little more on the value side of $350. Don't need to go polarized here. And my opponent decides to eventually make the fold. Finally, we got a big bluff through. We're not going to show it. We've got to pretend like we finally had a good hand. And look, if the cards are not going to come in our favor, at least we're going to finally win a nice pot and kind of give ourselves our own fortunes. If you folks are enjoying the video, make sure to click the like button down below. It goes such a long way in helping our community grow. Otherwise, it's enough of me bothering you guys. Let's get back into today's video because somehow this episode gets even more ridiculous. To this point, not a lot has been going in my direction. In this hand, I'm in the straddle. Middle position decides to raise to $25. We decide to look down at ace deuce offsuit here from the straddle. Any ace in the straddle seems like a defend, especially against such a small sizing. So I'm going to go ahead and make the call, and we're going off to a flop that comes pretty grim. It comes king 7-5. There are 2 diamonds out there. That's our only saving grace at this point. I decide to check. Our opponent decides to bet $40. A little bit on the larger sizing here. The one thing that I do say that I have going for me is that I have 2 backdoors that are pretty credible, and I feel like on any diamond I can pretty much blast off as a bluff. We've been bluffing quite a bit today, and And again, I did promise you guys at the beginning of the episode that I was going to be going for a lot of the bluffs. The turn card comes a beautiful card as it comes at 3 of clubs. The only thing that could have made it better was the 3 of diamonds, but we're going to have to make do. At this point, I decide to use this as a lead out for $150, going a little bit on the massive sizing here, trying to gear up for a really big bluff on the river. The river comes an absolute blank as it comes a 5. But the one thing I will note is that I'd definitely be playing every single boat in the same way, going pot, pot. And I'm going to be polarizing myself here because there's not going to be a ton of bluffs that I'm going to have here. And this just happens to be one of them. The only disgusting part is that I do have the ace of diamonds. I would hate to have this card on this run out because it takes away some of the big flush draws that my opponent would have. Anyways, I decide to bet for $375. My opponent thinks about it for about 15 seconds before inevitably deciding to make the call. He shows down ace king for a really big hand. Never going to be folding that. Probably if a diamond comes, he folds, but hard to tell really. Unfortunate for us. We've been just getting caught every single time today. So at this point, we're stuck like around $1,000. Like I said, the only saving grace from the episode was the fact that I was able to get one bluff through and that massive PLO bomb pot that we won early on in the session. In this spot, a new player has joined the table and he decides to open up to $25 from a $500 stack. 2 players decide to call him. It folds over to me. I'm going to go ahead and make the play here from the small blind. I decide to make it $150 to go, trying to isolate this early position raiser. And if not, at the very least, get down a pretty nice sizable pot. The early position raiser decides to jam all in. Everyone else folds. I decide to make the call. I say, let's run it one time. The flop comes out king high. My opponent immediately shows ace king. And yet again, ace king is my demise. Jax has never won me a massive pot, sadly. We seem to be always on the wrong side of a cooler. But anyways, pretty small pot, all things considered, and I can't kill myself over it. Hands like this just play themselves. Looking to bounce back like Rocky at this point, hoping to pick myself off the mat. We're catching up a little late in this hand. Early position, which is Andrew Vaughn. Shout out to him in his vlog. Great guy, really enjoyed playing with him. He decides to open at $25. We're on the button here and decide to make the call with queen 9 of hearts. And the big blind decides to make the call as well, and we're going 3 ways to a flop. Hoping to get lucky or at least spike some massive situations. And when the flop comes, 9-9-4. Bingo, bango, bongo, robongo. I don't even know what the hell. Finally, something we can play with, right? The action checks over to me, luckily, and I decide to bet pretty small here considering we have such a lock on this board. $40 to go. Both the opponents decide to make the call, and we're off to a turn card, which comes the ace of hearts. Bang! If my 9s weren't good enough, now we follow it with the flush draw. When it checks over to me, I decide to go pretty large here, and I bet $160, and only Andrew decides to make the call. The turn made my hand improve just a little bit with adding even more equity, and the river comes a 5. Nothing really changes here. When the opponent decides to check it over to me again, it's time to go polar because that's all I've ever known. It's all I've done today, and they've all been with bluffs. It's time to balance it with some value. I decide to bet $650, and Andrew pretty quickly decides to make the call. Finally, a hand coming in my direction. A massive pot here, played it very aggressive, and just like that, we ship over a $1,500 pot. Let's go. This next hand gets pretty mixy and ends up being a ton of fun. Early position, who's a friend, definitely a great fun player for the vlog. His name is Derek, a Austin, Texas regular. Derek decides to open to $25 off a $200 stack. Alex decides to 3-bet here to $85. When it gets over to me, I look at ace 8 of diamonds. I decide to 4-bet here to $325. Don't really care for my sizing here pre-flop. I think it's a little too large, but I know why I did it at the time. I did it because our opponent had about $200 in his stack, and that was Derek. He was trying to go for the old min, buy, and maximum out kind of strategy this session for some reason. But beyond that, I just don't care for the sizing. I think it's a little bit too large. I think something more along the lines of $275 makes a little more sense. But anyways, early position decides to jam for $200. Alex decides to call $325, and we're off to a flop that comes 7-6-4 with 2 hearts. Alex decides to check it over to me, and I decide to c-bet for the same price of $325, which is around 40% of the pot. Alex pretty quickly decides to fold. The turn comes an 8, giving us a pair. Hopefully that's enough. And the river comes a 9. Derek shows queen 10, decides to scoop the main pot with the old runner, because that's always much funner. Unfortunately, we lose the main pot, but we do win a pretty sizable side pot. So we're about break even or make a little bit of money on the hand, and we're going to move on. So maybe there still is some light at the end of the tunnel. As we move along throughout the session, hoping to get a little bit of the money back, see if we can't get back in black. 2 limps as it gets over to the button, who decides to make it $35. I look down at ace 7 of diamonds here in the big blind. Folds over to the straddle, who decides to make the call. One of the limpers decides to make the call, and we're going like 4 ways to a flop. Hoping to hit a miracle card. A flop comes 6-5 deuce with 2 diamonds. Chicks over to the button, who decides to c-bet for a larger sizing of $85. I decide to raise to $325. He has around $500 effective. I realize that my raise is massive here, but I'm trying to get better hands to fold, obviously, like ace king, pocket tens plus, somewhere in that range. And I'm trying to de-incentivize, if that even is a word, any of the other players from making a call or getting loose or getting a little crazy behind me. No one does that. It gets back over to the button player, who goes deep into the tank before inevitably deciding to go all in for $500. We make the call. He decides to run the boards out 2 times. I oblige. I think that's totally standard. We're looking to improve here. The first board comes out with a deuce of diamonds on the turn, binking the nuts here. The river comes a deuce, changing nothing. The second board comes out a 10 and a brick. Our opponent shows pocket aces, so we get super lucky there. Happy to do so. But it seems like if we ran it once, that was the optimal play. But in Texas, for the most part, I've been choosing what other people like to do, especially friends of the vlog, and that's who our friend was here, chopping up what it feels like pennies at this point, but could have been much worse, that's for sure. Like we said in the last session, one of my favorite things to do in poker is the old isolation play. In this hand, the double straddle is on. That's $20 to go. The first person decides to limp here for $20. Middle position decides to limp as well. We're in the first straddle with ace 8 of hearts, and I decide to isolate for $125. Both players decide to make the call, and we're off to a flop that comes ace king 9 with 2 diamonds. Action starts off with me. I'm going to go ahead and c-bet here for $135. Only the player in middle position decides to make the call. And we're off to a turn card, which comes the 5 of hearts. Not a whole lot to be scared of besides obviously the flush draw out there. I'm going to go ahead and be targeting those hands and continue bidding for value. I decide to double barrel here to $250. My opponent thinks about it over for a good second before deciding to make the fold. Haven't been getting to much showdown today, and if I have, I've been getting caught with my hand in the cookie jar. So at least finally we take down another pot here. Like I said, hopefully light at the end of this tunnel. This is the very last hand that we play in the state of Texas for this trip. Hopefully we can end this on a high note and get as close as we can back to the black. We look down at ace jack of clubs here from the button, and the person in the big blind bought the big blind, so there's only one blind out there. I decide to raise to $25. Only the big blind decides to make the call, and we're off to a flop that comes very nice. The flop comes ace 5 6 with 2 hearts out there. I decide to c-bet here for $35. My opponent decides to make the call. The turn card is a 9 of spades, which brings 2 flush draws out there. I decide to bet for value once again for $105. And at this point, a pretty interesting thing happens when my opponent decides to raise here to $300. Not a whole lot of sense is made here. Besides a straight draw that does come now on the turn, not a whole lot changes here. And with all that being said, I doubt a hand like 2-pair would be raising for value. But maybe so, it might happen. And even then, in Texas, people just tend to go a little bonkers in spots where, I mean, even, like I said, it's coming for me. So I decide to end up making the call, and we're off to a river card that comes the 4 of clubs. Pretty much a brick here doesn't change a whole lot to the board texture. My opponent thinks about it for a second before deciding on a check, and I pretty quickly decide to check it back as well, taking my showdown. I show ace jack of clubs. My opponent shows off ace 7, so value owning herself here in an unfortunate spot. But luckily for us, we're going to take down the last part of the session to get us close to that number that we needed to get to.
Did me wrong, I can't live for my heart.
So we ended up getting into this game for $3,100, and as you guys saw there from the last clip, out for $28.82. So for my really bad math, a little bit of a loss of like $218 or so. Not a horrible session. Like I said, Considering how bad we ran and how many bluffs got called today, it was all right. I'm pretty happy with the outcome, and I won't treat this as my heater going out. The light is just getting started, and I have a good feeling about what's left to come. What you guys can expect moving forward is more LA-based vlogs like you guys enjoy. If you guys would leave a comment down below letting me know where you guys would like me to play. I'm happy to play almost anywhere at this point. Let me know what stakes you guys enjoy watching me play. I've considered and dabbled with the idea of trying at a bankroll challenge of something, trying to get to a $10,000 bankroll playing 1-3 or 1-2 at my local casino. If that's anything you guys enjoy, please make sure to leave a like and a comment down below. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bells so you're informed every time I go live. Again, I want to thank you guys all for joining us on another episode and continuing to push our lovely content out to this beautiful platform, YouTube. I appreciate you guys as always. Make sure to stay happy, healthy, more importantly, run good at the tables, guys. Have a lovely day. Thank you guys as always, and I'll see you on the next one. Deuces.
Texting me, starting a fight. When will this end?